The ice didn't arrive like weather. It arrived like a decision. One moment June Calloway was navigating a 2-lane backroad through rural Hardin County, Tennessee, both hands locked on the steering wheel of her 12-year-old Honda Civic, the defroster losing its battle against the fog. The next moment, a full sheet of freezing rain swept down from the ridgeline and turned every surface, the road, the guardrails, the pine branches overhead, into something that gleamed like broken glass. Her rear tires lost contact before her brain could process what was happening. The car drifted sideways in perfect silence, tapped the soft shoulder, and stopped with its front bumper nesting in a dead cedar thicket 6 feet from the road. She sat there for a long moment, both hands still on the wheel, breathing. June was 43 years old, and she had been having the worst 6 months of her life. Her husband Danny had died of a sudden cardiac arrest in July. 48 years old, no warning, just gone between one heartbeat and the next. What followed was the kind of bureaucratic grief she hadn't been prepared for. A life insurance policy that turned out to be lapsed, a second mortgage she hadn't known about, medical bills that arrived in waves for weeks after the funeral. She had sold her good car, picked up every freelance appraisal job she could find, and tonight she was driving 2 hours through a January ice storm to assess a deceased estate near the Tennessee River for a probate law firm in Memphis that was paying her $800. Money she needed to make the February mortgage payment. She tried reverse. The tires spun, found nothing, and spun again. She tried her phone. 1 bar of service that vanished as soon as she attempted to use it. She sat in the car for 20 minutes, watching the ice accumulate on the windshield. The temperature gauge outside read 18 degrees. She had a wool sweater, a light jacket, half a thermos of cold coffee, and no blanket. Staying in the car was the rational option. It was what every survival guide told you to do. But the Honda was cooling fast, and the probability of another car coming down this particular back road at 8:30 on a Sunday night in January was essentially zero. She tried the phone one more time. Still nothing. She grabbed her bag, her thermos, and the flashlight she kept in the glove box, and she got out. The cold outside the car was a different animal entirely. It pressed flat against her face like a cold iron, immediate and personal. The beam of her flashlight caught the freezing rain mid-air, millions of tiny glass beads falling in perfect silent curtains. She kept to the road's shoulder, walking back the way she'd come, looking for any light, any structure, anything. She found the mailbox after a quarter mile. It was rusted, tilted at a 40-degree angle, and the name on the side had long since been painted over. But there was a gravel lane behind it, and at the end of that lane, June's flashlight caught the hard geometric angle of a roofline cutting above the tree line. A house. The lane was 100 yards of sheet ice, and she walked it with her arms out for balance until the structure materialized fully in her flashlight beam. It was a 2-story Victorian farmhouse, wraparound porch partially collapsed on the left side, paint peeled back to bare gray wood. A rusted farm truck sat in the side yard, its tires cracked and flat, weeds growing up through the engine bay. Nobody had lived here in a long time. The front door was secured with a padlock threaded through a hasp. The porch windows were painted shut. The side door, same padlock, same story. June stood in the freezing rain for 30 seconds, making a decision she would later have to explain to a property owner she'd never met. She pulled off her wool sweater, wrapped it around her right hand, and drove her elbow through the bottom pane of the side window. The glass came out cleanly. She reached through, unlatched the frame, pushed it up, and climbed inside. She landed on a kitchen floor. The cold inside was the same as outside. The house had been open to the weather for years through cracks in the walls and gaps around windows. But the wind was gone, and that alone felt like rescue. She pressed her back against the kitchen counter, pulled her sweater back on, and just breathed. Her flashlight swept the room slowly. The kitchen had been abandoned midlife, left exactly as it was the day someone walked out for the last time. A cast-iron skillet sat on a wood-burning cook stove, black with old grease. Mason jars lined a shelf above the sink, their contents reduced to dark sediment. A calendar on the wall showed September 1974. Somebody's grocery list, penciled on a torn paper bag, still sat beside a dry soap dish on the counter. The house smelled of cold ash, old wood, and something faintly metallic, the smell of locked rooms. June needed heat. Her fingers had already gone wooden and aching, that stage that comes just before they stop working. She moved her flashlight through the kitchen into the adjoining sitting room, and against the far wall she found what she was looking for. A wide brick fireplace with a cast iron insert. A log rack beside it still held 3 split pieces of oak, bone dry from decades inside a sealed house. She found old newspapers stuffed into a gap in the baseboard insulation and pulled them free. The dates she glimpsed read 1971, 1972. She crumpled them, stacked the dry oak on top, and struck a match from the box she always kept in her bag alongside the flashlight. A woman who drove rural Tennessee roads alone had learned to carry certain things. The fire caught with startling speed. Warmth flooded the small sitting room. June crouched before the hearth, holding her hands toward the heat, letting the blood come back painfully into her fingers. She was going to be all right. She was going to be cold and embarrassed, and she would explain herself to whoever owned this property. But she was going to be all right. It was then that the growing heat made the cast iron firebox expand slightly, and the insert shifted, just a 1/4 inch, and June heard something that didn't belong. A hollow sound, metal on brick. She took her flashlight and looked carefully at the firebox insert. It sat on a brick shelf, and on the left side of that shelf, partially hidden behind the iron body of the insert, she could see that 2 bricks had been set without mortar. Simply placed, not bonded. June hesitated. This wasn't her house, this wasn't her fireplace. She pulled the bricks out anyway. Behind them, in a cavity in the firebox wall roughly the size of a shoebox, sat a flat tin container, the kind that once held Christmas cookies with a faded poinsettia pattern on the lid. It was sealed around the edge with electrical tape that had dried to a brittle brown shell, and it was heavier than a cookie tin had any right to be. She carried it to the hearth and sat cross-legged in the growing warmth. The tape crumbled when she peeled it. The lid came off with a soft pressurized pop, the sound of 50 years of sealed air escaping all at once. Inside, wrapped in a piece of oilcloth, were documents, land surveys, carbon copy deed records, and handwritten ledger pages dense with property parcel numbers and dollar amounts. Beneath those, a cloth bag that clinked softly when she lifted it, 8 silver dollars, heavy and cold, and beneath the coins, sealed in a wax-edged envelope that had been taped shut a second time as insurance, a letter. Written across the front in careful block print, for Caroline Mercer, Hardin County Probate Court, if not sieved by hand. June stared at it for a long moment. Then she broke the seal. The letter was dated October 14, 1974. The handwriting was deliberate, the pen strokes of a man who understood he was writing something that needed to outlast him. Caroline, if you're reading this, it means I didn't make it to Savannah like I planned. It means Crane's people found me first, and I want you to know I always understood that was a possibility. The documents in this tin are the full record of what Patterson Crane did to 31 families in this county between 1961 and 1973. He bought off the county recorder. He filed forged quitclaim deeds. He took farms that had been in families for 3 and 4 generations, paid the clerk to backdate the transfers, and sold the parcels to development companies he owned under different names. By my count, those families lost between them nearly 4,000 acres and close to $1 million in land that was rightfully theirs. Your grandfather's farm is in there. So is the Dupree place, the Hollis parcel, the Kessler tract, all of it documented. The ledger pages are in Patterson's own handwriting. I took them from the records room myself. He doesn't know they're gone yet. Take everything in this tin to the FBI field office in Nashville, not the county sheriff, not the state police, The FBI Caroline, Patterson Crane, owns 3 people in this county with badges. I found that out the hard way. I hid this here because the farmhouse already belongs to nobody. The Kellerman estate has been in probate for 6 years, and nobody's come near it. Whoever finds this, whoever you are, please make sure it gets to her. I love you, Caroline. I'm sorry I couldn't finish this the safe way. Ezra. June lowered the letter. She sat very still, listening to the fire pop and settle. Ezra Whitfield had sealed this tin in October 1974. It was sitting in her lap now 50 years later, in the same fireplace, because Ezra had never come back for it. Whatever Patterson Crane's people had done to him, they had done it before he reached Savannah. And Caroline Mercer had spent 50 years not knowing why. June looked at the ledger pages again. At the top column of one page, neatly organized, property parcel numbers, dollar figures, and a company name she recognized from 2 signs she'd driven past that very afternoon on the county road. Crane Properties of Tennessee, LLC. She knew the name from industry newsletters. Crane Properties was one of the largest rural land developers in the Mid-South, and Dalton Crane, Patterson's son, was currently running for State Attorney General. The logs shifted in the fireplace. Embers skittered against the grate. And from outside, through the broken window, June heard the slow, deliberate crunch of tires rolling up frozen gravel. She killed her flashlight without thinking. The room dropped to firelight, orange and jumping. Through the grimy window glass, she could see headlights moving up the lane with the particular slowness of someone who isn't lost. Someone who knows exactly where they're going and isn't in any hurry, because they're sure nothing is going anywhere without them. A truck door opened. One set of heavy boots crunched onto the ice. June looked at the tin. She looked at the broken window she'd entered through. She made her decision in the space of one breath. She scooped the documents back into the tin, pressed the lid down, wrapped it in the oilcloth, and drove it deep into her shoulder bag. Then she pressed herself flat against the wall beside the doorway, gripping her flashlight with both hands. The side door swung open. Cold air flooded the kitchen. A flashlight beam swept the room. The man who stepped inside was heavy-set, wearing a canvas work jacket with a logo stitched on the breast pocket, a radio clipped to his belt, and the unhurried manner of someone who'd done this kind of thing before. He followed the warmth and light into the sitting room and stopped when he saw the fire burning in the hearth. "Hello?" His voice was flat and calibrated. "Somebody in here? This is private property." June stepped into the doorway. "My car went off the road down on the county road. I needed to get warm. I'll pay for the window." The man, broad face, close-cropped grey beard, eyes doing quick inventory, swung his flashlight onto her. It moved from her face to her bag to the fireplace, to the brick shelf where the cast-iron insert had been shifted 6 inches to the left, to the 2 bricks sitting loose on the stone floor, half visible in the firelight. Something in his expression went completely still. "Burke Nolan," he said. He wasn't looking at her anymore. He was looking at her bag. The rectangular outline of the tin was clearly visible against the canvas. "Property management for Crane Holdings." A pause that lasted exactly 1 beat too long. "You find anything in this house?" "Just an old fireplace," June said. "I'm going to need you to leave that bag," Burke said. His hand moved toward the radio but didn't lift it. He was making a calculation. "Standard policy. Found property on private land belongs to the landowner. Company policy, not my call." "I don't think that's actually the law," June said. "Lady." His voice dropped half a register. "I'm not going to argue law with you in an abandoned farmhouse at 9 o'clock on a January night." He took one deliberate step toward her. "Put the bag down." June ran. She went left through the kitchen, over the windowsill, and into the frozen air, her boots hitting ice and sliding immediately. She caught herself on the porch rail, kept moving, off the porch and across the yard. She could hear Burke behind her, heavier and slower, his boots losing purchase on the same ice that was trying to take her legs out. His truck was still idling in the lane, headlights cutting white columns through the freezing rain. She reached it before he did. She got in, found it in drive, and floored it. The truck's four-wheel drive found the gravel where her Honda had failed completely. She hit the main road in 40 seconds, turned south, and drove until her hands stopped shaking enough to notice the gas station lights 2 miles ahead. She used the station's landline. The teenager behind the counter didn't even blink, and called 911 first. Then she found the number for the FBI field office in Nashville. 2 days later, June sat across a conference table in Nashville from Supervisory Special Agent Sarah Voss, who was reading through Ezra Whitfield's ledger pages with the focused quiet of someone assembling something she's been looking for without knowing what it would look like. Patterson Crane died in 1989, Voss said. Not looking up. Natural causes, officially. She turned a page. His son Dalton has run Crane Holdings since 1994, currently polling third in the AG primary on a law and order platform. She looked up. These ledger records are original documents. If the handwriting authenticates against known samples from the county recorder's archive, Miss Calloway, this is a RICO case with a 50-year foundation. The handwriting will authenticate, June said. 3 weeks later, a federal grand jury in Nashville returned indictments against Dalton Crane and 4 senior executives of Crane Holdings on charges of wire fraud, conspiracy, and obstruction of justice. The indictments cited the systematic property fraud of 1961 through 1973 as foundational predicate acts in an ongoing criminal enterprise. Dalton Crane's campaign website went dark at 6 o'clock on a Tuesday evening. His campaign manager issued a statement. Nobody read it. June found Caroline Mercer through the Hardin County probate court records that Ezra had referenced in his letter. Caroline was 87 years old, living in an assisted living facility in Savannah, Tennessee. The same Savannah Ezra had been trying to reach when he wrote his letter 50 years ago. She had never left. She had waited, and then she had stopped waiting, and then she had learned to live inside that stopping. June drove down on a Saturday morning in February with the original letter in an archival sleeve, temporarily released by Agent Voss for next-of-kin identification. The woman who looked up when June knocked on the open door of room 14 was small and sharp-eyed, wrapped in a blue cardigan. A photograph on the windowsill June recognized instantly even from across the room. A young man, maybe 30, standing in front of a farmhouse. He had careful eyes and the posture of someone who knew how to hold very still. June sat down beside her. "Carolyn," she said, "my name is June Calloway. I found something that belongs to you." She placed the archival sleeve into the old woman's hands. Caroline looked at the block print letters on the front of the envelope without speaking. Her hands were steadier than June had expected. When she finally looked up, her eyes were wet, but her voice didn't waver. "I waited for him," she said quietly. "For 20 years I waited, and then I stopped because that was the only way I could keep living." She looked back at the envelope. "Where did you find this?" "In the farmhouse on Kellerman Road," June said. "In the fireplace. He hid it there in 1974. He wanted you to have it." Caroline closed her eyes. When she opened them again, she looked at June with something that held grief and relief inside it simultaneously. Two things that had no business being in the same place and had lived there together for 50 years anyway. "He always said the evidence was enough to take them down," she said. "He always believed that." "He was right," June said. June drove home in the pale February light, the Tennessee hills rolling out gray and cold on both sides of the road. She had $800 coming from the Memphis law firm for the appraisal she'd eventually completed. She had a small finder's fee coming under federal statute for documented evidence recovered and turned over to authorities. Enough, combined, to cover February and most of March. She was still behind. She was still learning to be a person in a world that had reorganized itself without asking her permission. But she had, in the space of one ice storm, helped close something that 50 years of silence had buried under gravel and frozen ground. She had put a letter into the hands of the woman it had always belonged to, and Ezra Whitfield, whoever he had been and however he had ended, had been right about one thing all along. The evidence was enough. What would you do if you found that tin? Would you open the letter, or walk away and call it somebody else's problem? Drop your answer in the comments. If this story hit you somewhere real, hit that like button and share it with someone who needs to believe that 50-year-old wrongs can still be made right. Subscribe to keep the drama and turn on notifications, because the next story is already waiting, and it's going to stay with you.